Welcome back to my channel. If you have any horror stories, do not hesitate to share them with us via email. Enjoy. This happened when I was 16 years old. At that time, my family lived near a brick factory. There was a very tall chimney in the factory. You could see it from afar. My school was located here. It was quite far from my home. I rode my bike to and from school every day. It took about 40 to 50 minutes. That day before going to school, my mom mentioned that she was making braised ribs for dinner. She told me to hurry home after school. I was overjoyed when I heard that. Braised ribs were my favorite. As the end of the school day approached, I became more and more distracted. All I could think about was braised ribs. When school was over, I rushed out like a gust of wind. I pedaled my bike toward home. I had many younger siblings at home. I was afraid that if I got home late, they would have eaten all the ribs. I had ridden the route home countless times. It was deeply ingrained in my memory. So as I rode, my mind often wandered. Sometimes I thought about things at school. Other times I thought about cartoon plots. Before I knew it, I had covered a long distance. But this time, I realized I had ridden quite a bit. This time, I was thinking about when the last time I had ribs was. It felt like it was last month. What other dishes were there that day? As I thought about it, I could almost smell the ribs. But when I snapped back to reality, I noticed the road around me seemed unfamiliar. It seemed I had never been here before. Usually, at this time, I would be able to see the brick factory's chimney in the distance, but now I couldn't see it. I stopped my bike and looked around. I couldn't find the familiar chimney. This was a completely unfamiliar road, but it didn't make sense. If I had ridden out from here, there was usually only one way home. Even if I was distracted, it wouldn't have been possible to go the wrong way. I tried to recall how I had ridden, but couldn't remember at all. All I remembered was that after setting off, I could only think about braised ribs. I tried riding a bit further, a bit more. I noticed a small store on the side of the road up ahead. I quickly rode over to ask for directions. Inside the store was an elderly man. I asked him how to get to the brick factory. He said to just follow this road down. So, I hadn't taken the wrong path. But why couldn't I find the chimney? And why did this road feel so unfamiliar? I started to break out in a cold sweat. I asked the store owner to borrow his phone to call home. The owner pointed to the phone on the side. I picked it up and dialed my home number. But nobody answered on the other end. With no choice, I left the store and continued riding forward. I kept riding for a long while. Still, there was no sign of the chimney. It was getting dark by then. I grew more and more anxious. I frantically kept riding forward, but all around was still unfamiliar wasteland. Eventually, night had fully set in. I felt completely hopeless, even though I was 16 years old enough to be considered grown. I completely broke down. I tossed my bike to the side of the road and sat down at the roadside, crying. After a while of crying, I felt exhausted. My vision was even getting blurry. Just as I was about to close my eyes and fall asleep, I faintly heard someone calling me. "Hey, young man." I felt a tap on my shoulder. I rubbed my eyes and saw it was a police officer. I instantly felt relieved. And to my surprise, it was already daylight. Just moments ago, It was pitch dark. The officer asked for my parents' names. After I answered, he spoke into his radio and said, "We found him." I was a bit stunned. Then he took me to the station. My parents were already there waiting. Only then did I realize that it was already the next morning. When my parents saw I hadn't come home, they searched along the route I took to school, but they couldn't find me. As night fell, they reported me missing. They searched for me all night. After we got home, I noticed my mom had saved a portion of ribs just for me. I happily ate it all. Then I told my parents all about what had happened the night before. My dad, not believing it, took me out on his motorcycle to check. But we searched the whole day and couldn't find it. Thinking back now, that road at the time was in the middle of nowhere. And there was just that one lonely store. Who would open a shop in such a place? One last thing. Even though it sounds a bit cliched, it's actually true. The spot where I was found was just a vast field not far away. That's the end of today's story. Do not forget to subscribe and like. See you next time. My husband really loves fishing, and I love camping. So every weekend, we often go to the riverside. We usually spend half the day there. It was a Friday. My husband excitedly told me, "The weather tonight is perfect. No rain." I thought, since it's the weekend tomorrow and I don't have work, I invited my best friend to join us. The three of us set off in the car. Since we hadn't eaten dinner yet, we grabbed some BBQ and beer along the way. When we arrived at the destination, near our usual riverside spot, my husband quickly got out of the car. He set up the canopy. I took out the BBQ and beer. He ate a few skewers in a hurry. Then he rushed down to the riverside with his fishing gear. My friend and I took our time, sitting under the canopy, drinking and chatting, talking about where to buy trendy shoes without getting tricked and saving money. The riverside was very quiet. You could only faintly hear the water flowing and insects chirping. It was incredibly relaxing. After a while, the BBQ was almost ready. My friend and I were feeling a bit tipsy. As we were chatting, we suddenly saw my husband rushing back up. He startled both of us. His face was pale, and he was drenched in sweat. He was also breathing heavily. Just as I was about to ask him what happened, he spoke first. He said, "I was calling out to you loudly just now. Didn't you hear me?" My friend and I looked at each other, both saying we didn't hear anything. Seeing our reaction, my husband didn't say anything else. He started packing up immediately, telling us to leave quickly. I was completely confused. What's the hurry? We haven't even finished drinking yet. My husband was no longer as tense as before. He just told us, "I was down there fishing just now. It seems like I encountered something spooky. I kept calling you guys, but no one responded. So I just ran back up here. I didn't even have time to collect my fishing rod. My friend got a bit scared for me. But I'm the type who, after a bit of alcohol, fears nothing and no one. So I told my friend to wait in the car, and I went down with my husband. I thought I'd also check out what that spooky thing was. I followed my husband down to the riverside. When we reached his fishing spot, His fishing rod was already broken in several places. The tools and bait from his tackle box were scattered all over the ground. And his tackle box was in even worse shape, floating on the water not far from us. My husband said everything was fine before I ran up here. Now I was starting to feel scared too. My husband gathered his courage and started shouting curses at the river. I quickly picked up any tools on the ground that weren't damaged. Then we rushed back up. We called my friend over and as quickly as possible, packed up the camping gear and loaded it into the car. We hit the gas and sped away. After driving for a while, we finally started to calm down a bit. My friend was in the back seat, nervously asking what exactly happened. Then my husband explained in detail what he had experienced. I was down there fishing. I cast the line a few times at first, but nothing was biting. I was thinking, the weather is so good. Why aren't there any fish? Then I cast another line. As soon as it hit the water, the float started moving. I quickly reeled it in, and what came up was a half-eaten dead fish. It looked like something had chewed on it. I thought, what bad luck. So I tossed it back into the water. But every time I cast the line again, it felt like it snagged on something. I couldn't reel it up at all. I started to feel like something was wrong. Goosebumps were all over my skin. I had this feeling that something in the water was staring at me. So I turned back and tried to call you guys down. I yelled at the top of my lungs several times, but no one answered. I turned around to look and saw a shadow dart quickly into the reeds on the opposite riverbank. I stared at those reeds intently, holding my breath. Then I saw the reeds shift slightly in a small area. The pale white hands slowly emerged and started clapping at me. I didn't even have time to grab my fishing rod. I scrambled up in a panic to find you both. After hearing this, my friend and I fell silent. My friend was clearly quite shaken. She said she would never go fishing with us again. After we dropped her off at her home, we went back to our own home. In the garage, my husband and I decided to sort through the stuff from tonight. Since we were in such a hurry before, we had just thrown everything haphazardly into the trunk as we were organizing. We noticed that the tools I picked up from the riverside were all slightly damaged. Upon closer inspection, we found several distinct bite marks. After this experience, we both decided never to go night fishing again. That's the end of today's story. Do not subscribe and comment. See you next time.